Right now, we're going to focus on the mega infrastructure, where how much should we spend to make it worthwhile, where there will be no more mega projects, says Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, and he said that national development will focus on infrastructure, facilities and projects of public interest, as well as supporting industrial areas according to state priorities. And to discuss further on this, with me virtually right now is Mr. Siva Shanker, CEO of estate agency Rahim Co. First of all, when we talk about balancing mega infrastructure spending with housing needs, maybe you can share with us, with significant investment in infrastructure projects, how do you propose the government balance spending on mega projects with addressing critical housing shortages, maybe especially for middle income Malaysians?
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. Good morning. To answer your question, this balancing act is probably the most difficult thing to do. You need to balance whether cost versus effect. How much money do I put in versus what kind of benefit do I get back? Let's be very clear on one thing. I think large infrastructure projects, especially projects which are like roads and rail and trains, stuff like that, you probably never get a return on your investment ever. It probably is a social project that is put in place to alleviate the living standards of the occupants of the city or the town that they're in.
Mr. Siva, are there risks in diverting too much capital towards large-scale infrastructure, maybe at expenses of addressing housing affordability?
There are risks, of course, because you take a big risk of having put billions of dollars into a project. And if there's no traction from the public, if there's no usage of that project to its full advantage, then the risk of it turning into a white elephant is always there. So we have, I think, if you look back in time, we have done some major infrastructure projects in Malaysia, some of which I think seem to be a little bit underutilized. But many of these infrastructure projects have become very well utilized, like the trains, the LRT and the MRT, and even the airports. I think those are infrastructure projects that, even though they are very expensive and costs billions of dollars, Malaysia has no choice at all, but to go forward with those infrastructure projects. If you want to be a first world country, you must have first world infrastructure. Simple as that.
Maybe how do you see mega infrastructure projects like improved public transportation or highways like ECRL and a few highways, especially in Klang Valley, influencing housing markets in urban centres like in Klang Valley, Kuala Lumpur? Will they make home ownership more attainable or drive up prices further?
Well, the buzzword in the housing market today is TOD, transport-oriented development. A transport-oriented development is defined as a development that is within or close to a train station, an LRT or an MRT station. Now, although these are great public amenities and it's good for us to have a train station near the house or near the apartment, what it has done, in essence, is it has pushed prices upwards a little bit. So a transport-oriented development is able to sell for 20, maybe 30% more than a normal development, a similar normal development, which is not on a line or not close to a station.
Yeah. Maybe you can share, can infrastructure development in more remote areas, for example, like as you can see, ECRL in Kelantan, for example, help alleviate housing pressure in urban centres, or maybe in terms of suburban, and what role should the government play in making these areas more attractive?
Okay. Look, if you had Malaysians are a spoiled bunch. We like to drive everywhere. That's why our roads are packed with cars, and we seem not to have too much of affinity for transport, for public transport. But if you go to other parts of the world, if you looked at places like London, I think it's not impossible at all to live far away from the city, get up in the morning, jump on a fast train, and the train takes an hour and a half, and you're in the city. I live, I live in Sungai Long, and it takes me an hour and a half to come to work every morning anyway. What difference would it make if I lived in Ipoh and I could take a train and be in Kuala Lumpur city center in an hour and a half? The living in Ipoh to me would be the same as living in Sungai Long, because it would take an hour and a half. So if the public transport, that train, was fast, reliable, and to point, I could live in Ipoh, and that would take the pressure off the city, and it would give places, faraway places like Ipoh and everywhere else, a new lease in life. So it's a double thing.
Uh, Mr. Siva, I would like to bring our discussion into sustainability of infrastructure-led growth. Is the current approach to infrastructures project sustainable from an economic perspective, and maybe particularly in ensuring that housing, healthcare, and education don't take a back seat?
Infrastructure and housing cannot always be tied together. Take, for example, KLIA, the airport, which is a major infrastructure project. Um, if you try and tie it with housing, then you may not have a correlation that succeeds. But you've got to look at the infrastructure project as something for the good of the country. So you build KLIA in Sepang, and over the last 10 years, the whole of the Sepang area has come to life. There's a big industrial area there. There's lots and lots of housing there. There's some colleges and universities there. So this is great. That single infrastructure project has breathed a lease of life to the entire location. That, I think, is the multiplier effect we must look at.
Yeah. Maybe in terms of, in your experience, what is the optimal level of infrastructure investment to spur long-term growth while ensuring that other essential sectors such as affordable housing are not neglected?
Again, I think infrastructure and housing must be separated. I think what will happen, or what really does happen, is as infrastructure grows, as infrastructure expands, you will find that housing will follow. Now, that's the mantra anyway. Just follow the infrastructure. So follow the trains or follow the roads. Look at the Plus Highway. Look at what the highway has done for the larger part of the Klang Valley. There is so much of development in the northern and southern parts of Klang Valley, which could not have been possible if not for the North-South Highway. So I could get from KL to Rawang or even Bukit Brontong in half an hour, 45 minutes. And therefore, I don't mind living over there. So the infrastructure has opened up housing.
One of the main indicator and also initiative that we should look on at the public-private partnership. Would you advocate for more PPPs in infrastructure development, similar to the maybe My Home Guarantee Scheme for housing, or could this model drive both affordable housing and also large-scale infrastructure?
I think if the government, my opinion is infrastructure should be government-led, and to a large extent it has been. I mean, look at KLIA, look at the MRT projects, look at the LRT project. They really have been government-driven. But government-private partnerships is always welcome in the event that the government doesn't have the kind of money to spend or can't afford to spend that kind of money at this very moment, then I think it's a good idea to bring in a private partner, let him run it. And unfortunately, when that happens, the private partner will need his money back in some way. And so therefore, the toll collections and stuff like that.
Mr. Siva, in your opinion, how can developers be incentivized to integrate housing needs into large infrastructure projects, ensuring a holistic approach to urban planning?
The developers, we need to be very careful here. The developers cannot be expected to be the driver of these infrastructure projects, because if they are, then I can assure you they will find a way to put that cost back into the houses. So the public ends up paying for it. Nobody is going to spend $1 billion to do infrastructure and not pass that cost on to their purchasers. So we need to be careful. We need to separate infrastructure and housing. If you try and combine that, my opinion is the prices of houses will skyrocket upwards.
And of course, we need to discuss on the ROI of the mega infrastructure investment. Maybe what metrics should we use to assess whether spending on mega infrastructure projects has been worthwhile, and is there a point at which the social and economic returns diminish?
I think some infrastructure projects may have an ROI, but whilst others may not have an ROI, so you may have to look at the social impact and the humanity and community impact to gauge success. For example, if you let's take the airport as an example. I think the airport is a huge success. Malaysia airports seem to be making money, so that infrastructure has produced a nice, healthy, comfortable return. But if you look at other infrastructure projects, take for example the MRTs, I don't see how they can be profitable, at least not in the short to medium term. Perhaps in the long term, in the very long term, maybe it might turn profitable. Maybe it might not. And the ECRL, which goes into Kuantan, Pahang, Terengganu, and Kelantan, that's going to be a great catalyst for developments in the east coast of Malaysia. Yeah. But try as I might, I cannot see it turning profitable because the cost is so huge.
Yeah. Lastly, maybe about around 2 minutes of our discussion, can large-scale infrastructure investment be strategically used to unlock affordable housing opportunities, particularly in underdeveloped regions? And how should the government prioritize between these two?
I think that's a good question, and I think yes. The answer to that is yes. Infrastructure projects can unlock opportunities for affordable housing. If land in central KL or its periphery is very expensive, and you cannot build affordable housing or low-cost housing on these pieces of land, then you need to move further. But if you move further and further away from the city, nobody wants to buy because they can't travel back and forth. But if you build a solid set of highways, interconnecting roads, and more importantly, if you build rail trains to these locations, then it offers the average public person, the B40 or the M20, to allow them to buy properties further away, because they can jump on a train and come to work in the city, or the kids can jump on a train and go to school and come back. So that is the idea. Expand the infrastructure and housing will follow.